Hi, this is Laura Hetzler at the Wayne State University Pre-Med and Health Science Center. I'll be hosting this interactive workshop entitled, How Competitive Are You? The goal of this event is to help people assess their own readiness to apply to either medical or dental school in the upcoming cycle. Now, if you are a younger student and you are joining us to learn about assessing your own readiness ahead of time, great, thanks for joining. And if you are a current student who's considering applying now, hopefully you'll get some important information tonight that will help you determine whether or not this is the year for you. If you think back to the topics you have worked on with your pre-health advisor over the past 3 or 4 years, these sorts of things should sound familiar. These are the elements of a competitive application, and they are definitely built on a foundation of strong metrics in your grade point average and standardized test score. But more importantly, and more difficult to assess, are the qualitative or sort of soft skills that make an excellent candidate stand out from an average candidate. The qualitative information helps schools really zero in on who they want to see after they've used quantitative information to narrow the pool. It's important to consider that many medical schools are receiving 8,000 to 10,000 applications each year and will only interview 500 to 700. The Wayne State School of Medicine is unusual in that they interview about 1,000 candidates every year, but that's still a big narrowing of the pool from 8,000 to 10,000 people down to 1,000 people. So you want to make sure that you have as robust a profile as possible before you hit submit. We're going to start with the quantitative data because I think that that is the easiest to understand and the easiest to explain. This chart in front of you is provided to us by the American Association of Medical Colleges. It shows its aggregate data over 3 years of application. Now, I wish dental schools would give us the same kind of information, or that DO schools would give us the same kind of information. But honestly, AMCAS or the AAMC is the best data provider to help us make decisions. And so we will leverage that to the extent that we can. So this gets updated annually. If you look at this chart, you should notice that along the vertical axis, you can see total grade point average. And then along the horizontal axis, you can see MCAT scores. And then as you assess MCAT score compared to grade point average, you actually will, within each cell, you can see what the acceptance rate was for the individuals who fit that metric profile. So for example, students in the 3 years from the 2020, 21 to 2023, 7 students applied to medical school who had a grade point average greater than a 3.79, but lower than the 210 people applied who had a higher than a 3.79 GPA and lower than a 486 MCAT score. So very high day-to-day academics, very poor performance on a high stakes exam. Of those, only 7 people in 3 years were accepted. So that tells me, obviously that's not where you want to be. We like to see our candidates hitting submit when the combination of their test score and GPA will get them at least a 50% chance of acceptance. And this chart can help us as a tool decide if you fit in that category or not. I do want you to remember that total grade point average is all classes taken, all institution, all attempts. So that does include repeated scores. and that we know that there's going to be outliers. We don't want you to be in that outlier pile, right? We want you to be in the strongest possible pile of applicants. Many of our students who are successfully admitted to medical and dental school will kind of be in this band, this 3.6 to 3.79. That means at least for med school, hitting a 510 or above makes a big impact in your readiness to apply. That 506 to 509 is a little bit wobblier. We've only got about just under a 40% acceptance rate for people who have a 3.6 to 3.79 and a 506 to 509. So that's, again, kind of having these kinds of conversations, using the data to assess and support your decision to apply. It's a really critical self-assessment point. I think it's also important to recognize that statistically, we're kind of looking at students in a bandwidth. So a student who has a 3.75 is just about as competitive as somebody who has a 3.65, right? That at that point, you're in the same general category. And that once you get above a 3.8, really that 4.0 is not any stronger than the 3.8 itself. The other thing I think is important to point out is when we look at all applicants across all metrics, none of these categories has a 100%. So even students who had higher than a 3.8 and greater than a 517, so greater than the 90th percentile on the MCAT, they're admitted at an 83% rate over these 3 years. So 17% of those students were not admitted. That's where the qualitative piece comes in. What was it about those students that, despite their strong academics, medical schools were not willing to take a chance on them and admit them to their class? So I want you to stop and think. We've got some basic metrics that we just threw out there. This is a great time to pull out your phone, pull out a piece of paper, and reflect on kind of your own data points within the aggregate information. Your pre-health advisors spend a lot of time talking about your science grade point average. So is your science grade point average at or above a 3.6? For MD application, that's your bio, your chem, your physics, your math. For dental and DO, it's bio, chem, and physics. So the first question you need to ask yourself is my science grade point average at or above a 3.6? And is my overall grade point average at or above a 3.7? 3.7, as I stated on the previous slide, is the grade point average where most of our students are successful in applying to med and dental schools. And the reason it's important to look at both science and overall is that those two numbers need to be equally strong. I also want you to think about and reflect on whether or not you have taken or will have taken the MCAT or DAT before the application opens. Now, if you don't know those dates are always going to be in the beginning of May. So a question to ask yourself, will you have done the test before the beginning of May? And is your test score at or above a reasonable percentage for admission? What we've identified here is a 510 for your MCAT. That's based on looking at national data as well as the data for our students. And then the DAT, so a 20 or above on the DAT. If you cannot answer yes to all 4 of those questions, please schedule a meeting with me or one of the other pre-health advisors before proceeding with the application cycle. If your no answer came in the grade point average questions, we want to help you create a plan to improve this before applying. And if you answered no to the test question, particularly if you are going to take you'll have taken the exam, but you won't have a score. So if it's the MCAT exam, maybe you're taking it at the end of April, it takes a month to score. We want to help you assess how the test date you've selected, how that score report release fits with the overall timeline of application. So that's where it's sort of let's really make sure we're nailing down the test dates and that you have a good understanding of where you're going to be in the cycle before you decide to proceed. Ultimately, this is an expensive, stressful process. Our goal is for you to be successful on the first go round and not have to reapply. Would much rather see you wait a year, go into an application strong and have choices about where you're going to attend grad school than to go in a year early with an eager application and have to go through it all again. Okay. Moving on. Let's assume those metrics look gorgeous. You know you're going to have your test score. Maybe you've already got your test score in hand, and you know for sure that the metrics are going to support you going into this application cycle. What else do you have? Okay, because you need both. You need both that strong quantitative that we just discussed and strong qualitative aspects to your application. But assessing and evaluating that qualitative data is much more challenging because there's not a nice magic number that I can give you and tell you need to shoot for in order to be competitive. Within this side of assessment, it is much about the how and why as it is about the what and where. Okay, so within the context of the application, first, let's say 7 to 10 pages are all going to be fairly straightforward sets of information. Your name, your address, basic biographical information, information about your parents, maybe your siblings, how many people live in your home, how you paid for your undergraduate degree, if you were Pell Grant eligible, if you've ever been in trouble at school and had a disciplinary action against you. You're going to enter all of your grades for all of the courses you've ever taken. You do all of that data entry. And when you're done with that part, you're going to move on to what's called either the work and activities section or the supplemental information section. The AMCAS application calls it work and activities. The dental and DO applications call it supplemental information. You have a certain number of fields that you can fill out. AMCAS gives you a maximum of 15. ACOMAS and ADSAS give you an unlimited number, but they have less flexibility in terms of how you use that space. You can see here, there are some drop-down types that you'll use to categorize your experiences. There's not enough room on this for the AMCAS experience categories. They have so many different ways they allow you to kind of label your work and activities. ACOMAS, ADSAS, what's nice about them actually with the fewer list is there's not a lot of choices. You don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about whether or not you're going to use one label over another. So hopefully, as you've been going, you have been keeping a resume or an updated CV with all of your work and activities listed in one place, right? You've been busy. You've been balancing work and school and volunteerism and clinical experience, okay? I think it's important to pause and reflect on why programs ask you about these things, okay? You are definitely doing these to show your commitment to your profession of choice and build an understanding of that profession, right? That's what the clinical experience in particular is all about. But the undergraduate years are also about developing yourself and your soft skills and your ability to engage in the world outside your home, okay? And it's your opportunity to build the evidence to support your why, to support your decision in applying to these competitive programs, okay? It's not about checking the boxes. If you've got multiple experiences that can be categorized in different ways, we might be able to exercise some strategies about how you do that. And you can use AMCAS categories to align what you got out of an experience with what you want the medical school to know about you. Okay. We frequently will reference something called the core competencies. And if you Google core competencies AAMC, you'll come up with a list. I think it's up to 17 different qualities that healthcare professions are looking for. This is something that was generated by the MD programs, but DO schools, dental schools, PA programs, tons of health professionals across the spectrum reference this list because it really encapsulates what we're looking for in future healthcare professionals. A good exercise can be looking at that list of your work and activities, looking at your CV, thinking about how you might use these experience categories to highlight your growth, your achievement, your breadth, your depth across different categories. And after you've done that, look at those core competencies. We're going to jump to the next screen and I'll ask you to kind of pause and self-reflect again. You can get a deeper dive into the core competencies and how to think about them in our Anatomy of an Applicant workshop, which is posted online at our YouTube channel, youtube.com, and it's /PMHSC, Pre-Med and Health Science Center. That gives us there's an opportunity we took to do a deeper dive into those core competencies and how you want to think about them as you go through the application process and identify areas where you'd like to grow. So you've got your CV in hand, you're thinking about the ways you've been busy, and I want you to pause and ask yourself a couple of questions. Consider whether you've got enough direct patient experience, so experience where you are speaking to a patient, not just watching someone else work, but you are building some of those communication skills and some of the empathy. You've got enough direct patient experience to explain why you're a good fit for the profession. And again, looking at that, explain why. It's not just that you understand in your head, but you can articulate to me, based on the time you've spent with patients, why you want to continue down this path. I want to see some depth. So when you look at that CV, is there something you can point to where you show long-term commitment of a year or more? And at the same time, have you done some breadth? Have you done some exploration of different types of spaces, a variety of work environments, of a variety of service activities? The breadth is just as important as the depth, right? This is how we get to that well-rounded candidate, as someone who's got a little bit of both. Can you point to some place where you have spent time working with underserved population? Now, that underserved population can vary by definition, right? There's lots of ways that there are communities in need, particularly here in Southeast Michigan. And can you demonstrate with your free time outside of school that you're committed to helping those people in need? Take a look at the core competencies. Ask yourself, can you identify 3 competencies that are areas of strength? And then connect that to where you developed the strengths through your work and activities, through your engagement. Those types of questions are a self-assessment of your qualities and knowing yourself and your areas of growth. But the next layer of qualitative assessment comes from people who know you. Okay, what do I mean by this? This is your letters of recommendation. Each application portal requests a certain number of letters. It's pretty standard for candidates to submit 3 to 5 letters that will remain confidential and they will never see. You do want to do some researching on the programs you're interested in to see how you might look through your experiences, through your circle of support, and select some people to speak on your behalf. But I want you to consider within that network whether you've got a good team of people who can do the following. Are there people in your network of support where you have strong, high quality relationships? Okay. It might be with faculty. Everybody really does need to have some science faculty members in their pool of potential letter writers. When I say faculty member for a letter of evaluation, I am specifically talking about someone who had you in a class of biology, chemistry, or physics and can grade you relative to your peers. Okay. You may have letter writers who are faculty members who you've engaged with in different ways, but that biology, chemistry, physics professor who had you in a class is an important box checking letter. You'll hear me refer to that again. I do need you to have at least one person who would be willing to write for you. Now, as you consider these people that you have these strong relationships with, I want you to ask yourself, are you comfortable in asking them to write a letter for you that you will never be able to read? Okay. That's the confidential nature of this process. Yes, there are letter writers out there who will show you the letter they wrote about you when they're done. However, the intent of this process is that it remains confidential. And what this question should help you identify is if you've got that level of trust and close knowledge where you know you can rely on someone to say the things that you need them to say in this process. I also think it's a useful exercise to consider a specific example of excellence, development, strength, or an achievement you had that person would be able to comment on. Sometimes you may even have to provide that as a prompt to the person you've asked. When I meet with a student who's asking me for a letter of evaluation, one of my first questions to them is, what do you think I will say about you? And that is not because I need suggestions on what to put on my letter, but because I want to know if they have the same perspective on our relationship that I do. And then there will usually be a follow-up question from me as to where the evidence of that aspect of our relationship comes from. So for a student that maybe I've been meeting with over time and we've had to really talk about some academic difficulties, I might say, tell me what you think I'm going to say. And I've had students say to me, well, I think you're going to be able to comment on my ability to get better and how when we met after my freshman year and that biology class didn't go very well, you and I were able to talk and we had that difficult conversation, but based on that conversation, you saw me get better and we met the whole next year and we talked about how I was using different resources. So I think you'll really be able to comment on that. And that to me is the sign of that really mature individual who is ready to go into this next step because they have paused to reflect on the things they've accomplished. They can articulate them and they can see that those qualities are of value to the professional school they're hoping to attend. Finally, getting these kinds of in-depth interpersonal relationships with your science faculty members is extremely hard. Programs know this. They're still going to ask you for the letter, and they might even ask you for 2 science letters. So you may find that your non-science letter writers, that those asks, those relationships are really easy to rely on in this process. But I need you to identify at least one science professor who would write you what we call a box checking letter, right? They're mostly going to say, the student took my class in this particular semester. They might be able to comment on your grade. They might be able to give a little bit of feedback about the fact that you sat in the front of class, but there's not going to be a lot of interpersonal knowledge or content in this letter. What the letter will allow you to do is submit it to schools that have to have it. And so they will see that sort of formish letter, not a lot of information letter, but that your other letters in that package will give them a lot more additional information, right? So having that box checking letter is so that you can apply to the schools where you have to have it. And even though we know it's not strong, it does mean that you can continue to move through the process with that particular program. Okay. So we talked about looking at your quantitative information, comparing it to national acceptance data to help that be one level of decision-making in the process of whether or not to apply. And we've talked through qualitative data and the kinds of questions you need to ask yourself to assess if your resume is robust enough and if your support network is strong enough to support you going through the cycle. There are quite a few tools out there that you're going to want to look at in order to help you do some of this decision making. The first tool, which is by far the most useful, it's called MSAR, or the Medical School Admissions Requirement Guide, MSAR. You'll hear it abbreviated. Again, Google MSAR. It'll come up. It's pretty low cost for a 1-year subscription. There is something similar for DO schools called Choose DO Explorer. It's free. You do have to give them some login information. And it doesn't have the kind of detailed information that we can get out of the MSAR. And then Dental School Explorer, which is very much like the DO Explorer. Again, pretty low cost, fairly low level stats, but still useful. What I particularly like these 3 resources for is coming up with a realistic list of where to apply. That usually starts with comparing your metrics against the average class profile for any given school you're interested in, right? That's going to help you screen down and create a list of schools where you will fit numbers-wise. It's also going to have some information about how you might fit profile-wise. Our work and activities, the volunteerism, the job you take, what you have to say with it is a reflection of your values and goals. All of the products listed on the screen will include the school's values and goals in their mission statement, in their purpose, in their goals statements. So you want to see if the school you're looking for really connects with the values that you've expressed through your work and activities. We want to make sure there's a synergy, because that is going to really help you get past simple number screen portion to have someone take a deeper look at your application. Once you have come up with that list, you can go look more closely at school websites, see what you find there. Get a sense of the things that they are highlighting through the photography, through the ways that they talked about students, the ways they talk about faculty. What kind of sense can you get? What level of deeper information can you get from the school websites? I recommend that as the second step. There's simply too many schools out there. And as you make a list, it's really important to have more schools that are close to your metrics profile. You're going to have a few reach schools, but we want to have a nice, strong range of schools that where you can be a competitive candidate. But ultimately, the school list is sort of that final piece on whether or not you're competitive. A student with solid metrics that might be very reasonable at, say, 2 or 3 in-state schools, would maybe be unreasonable if they complied completely out of state. So this is a little bit more information about how to use these tools. The tools are for your big list, right? And that's the other thing. I want you to look at ranges. So the medical school admissions requirement guide will show you the range. It will show you the median score, but more importantly, can you look the 25th to 75th percentile? What is the range of grade point averages that have performed well through the admissions process at this institution? What are the outliers, right? If you've got 1 or 2 schools where you're down around only about, you're at the 10th percentile of their admitted students for 1 or 2 schools, that's fine. I don't want you to have 9, 10, 12 schools where you're down at this bottom end of their metrics. You need to consider your school type. This has a huge impact on competitiveness in a way that is sometimes surprising to students. Can we talk private versus public? Private institutions get funding from a variety of sources, but none of it comes from tax dollars. Public schools, the majority of their funding comes from tax dollars. And as a result, most public institutions are looking to train healthcare professionals who have a history of being in the state, right? So it's their historical tax dollars at work, but also if you've been raised and educated in a place, you're much more likely to stick around afterwards to pursue your professional practice. So for public institutions, they're really looking to recruit, retain, and train students from their home state. A lot of our undergrads will look at the private versus public, and the first thing that jumps out is the difference in the price tag, okay? Public institutions for their in-state residents for sure are cheaper. But as an out-of-state resident, so as a Michigan resident attending a public school in Ohio, you'll find that tuition is pretty comparable to a private school, right? So if the tuition differential is the same, you need to then look at admissions protocols. You'll find if you look at the number of students who apply out of state to a public school relative to the number of students who get admitted from out of state to a public school, there's a huge discrepancy. And in fact, some public schools really don't admit anyone who resides outside the state. So that's where, if you look at the metrics might look like you're a good fit. A popular version of this is University of South Carolina's medical school. You'll see that the average GPA and average MCAT score aren't super high. But that's because they're looking to recruit and retain people in the state of South Carolina. They're not looking, and they don't really admit people from outside the state. So it's not worth your time and money to apply there, even though your metrics look good. You're not a fit in other ways. So as you look at your list, you should definitely be looking at all the public schools in your home state. And I would even encourage you, most of the private schools in the state of Michigan are very favorable towards Michigan residents. But as you look out of state, any schools that are on your list probably should be private. Private schools don't have to take your state of residence into account. Okay, so all the in-state publics, private schools, both in-state and out of state, is what should be on your list. Beyond that, like I said, that mission statement, do the values expressed by the school about what they are hoping to accomplish match what you've been working on throughout your undergraduate career in your work and activities? And then the final piece that I think is important to know is that early application is important no matter the deadline. There are backlogs in the process where verification of application has to happen, and we can talk about this in one-on-one appointments. But what's important to remember is that the majority of institutions in this country as they begin taking applications in each year, they begin deciding who they want to interview. And as they make decisions about who they want to interview, the number of interview seats goes down, right? Because they've given some of those seats away. So if you come in late in the process, you have to truly be exceptional to get one of those last interviews. The schools are always going to hold out a few interview seats for those outlier students. But you want to be hitting submit when you have the best chance of getting one of those limited interview seats. We spend a lot of time in the late spring and early summer talking to students about when specifically they're going to apply. What does their school list look like? Is there any advantage or disadvantage to adjusting that application date? Okay. Why do we care so much, right? This is expensive. This gives you kind of a snapshot of the cost of applying to medical school and dental school. There is financial aid available for all of the different application portals. The amount of money given to support low-income students in applying to DO and dental school is very small. There's a lot more money available for students applying MD who come from a lower socioeconomic background. But you can get a sense here of all of those places that money is going to go. You need to have several $1,000s saved up before you go into the application cycle, okay? We've included here a couple of things that might be new terms for you. One is the online situational judgment test through Altius Suite. This is otherwise known as, formerly known as Casper. You will also see Duet and Snapshot. They're different standardized exams offered by a third-party vendor that some schools do require as part of the process. The AMC preview exam is another version of an online informational sort of quasi-interview tool that has to be paid for separately if your schools require it. You'll see there's a few others out there. One's called Kira Talent. I don't remember other names off the top of my head, but this is all sort of important things to consider as you think about the financing. We're lucky in that interviews post-COVID have been mostly online. That reduces one major area of cost, although you do still need to have shoot, sues, haircut, things like that, so you can have that, project that image during your interview. And then the final sort of layer of expense that you will experience during the application process is deposits. Med schools have done a nice job of coming together in support of students, and no single school is allowed to request more than $100 to hold a seat. DO and dental schools, you're going to see a range of, up to $2,000. Typically, especially DO and dental, these are non-refundable. So if you are at multiple institutions, you may be putting down multiple deposits. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to put this all together so we understand the timing a little bit. Most students will be taking that big standardized test somewhere in what the Wayne State will call the winter semester, somewhere between January and May. DAT is nice because you get an unofficial score report right away. The MCAT, unfortunately, we do have that 30 days approximately that you have to wait to get your score report. We want you to have your score in hand. Can you hit submit without it? Absolutely. Do we truly know if you're competitive without it? Not at all. Okay. We really want to see that score. Applications open for editing in early May. This year, the MD application opens on May 1st. The dental application opens on May 4th. And the DO application, they just announced, and it's not in time for me to adjust this PowerPoint, opens on May 6th this year. They all have what we would call a soft opening. So you have a certain amount of time to get in there, do your data entry, update your biographical information, submit transcripts, get letters in there, do your work and activities, right? So they give you some time on that. And then there will be a first day where you can hit submit. Only date we have so far for the 24-25 cycle is AMCAS. First date to submit is May 28th. Also, if you notice in that blue box, you'll see that I'm talking about the 2025 AMCAS. So AMCAS, or the MD application, labels their applications by the year of entry. The other ones enter by academic year. So ADSAS and the DO application, they call it the 24-25 because the application opens in 24 and it runs through 2025. I think that makes way more sense, but it's important to know that those two things are different, and that if you are applying MD in this current calendar year, that is actually the 2025 application. Okay. So you're going to hit that primary. We've got a green band in here, file primary May to August. I really like everybody to get their primary in by 4th of July. It doesn't always happen. There's a certain amount of time it takes for them to process those primary applications. Again, if each individual med school gets 8,000 to 10,000 applications, usually there's about 50,000 people nationally applying for MD schools every year. It takes a long time for the American Association of Medical Colleges application service to verify everybody. MD schools at that point will be asking for what they call secondaries. These are additional questions that require more writing, more contemplating, more editing. And that goes on for the MD schools between sort of July is when it will start. We love everybody to have their secondaries in by the end of September. DO schools and dental schools, you will find this additional essay writing in the supplemental materials section of the application. Some schools have them, some schools don't. Amanda, Doug, and I can work with you on kind of prioritizing applications so that you can start the processing and then kind of go back and add the schools later that have those supplemental questions so that you're moving through in a timely manner. Schools use different timelines for their interviews. Wayne State School of Medicine the last few years has been more sort of mid-late August. There are MD schools that start as early as late July. Dental schools like to have all of their interviews done by the beginning of December. MD schools across the country are going to continue to interview into March. MD schools will begin opening acceptance offers and issuing those to students in October, middle of October. Dental schools, it's middle of December. As these programs are accepting students and having students indicate that, yes, they'd like to hold a seat, they're continuing to look at other applications in their pile and other people they've interviewed to decide if the new people who are coming in the door that they could potentially ask to meet in an interview are better than or not than the people they've already talked to, right? This is the rolling process. As they look at the incoming applications, they're making decisions about who they want to talk to, about who they want to interview. And that actually can go on right up until almost up until the type of matriculation. So if you look at this, I know we have it all on one screen, but honestly, the application cycle extends through March into May or June for some students who are on wait lists. So this is really 18 months. So if the last screen focused on the expense related to this process, this screen really relates to the stress that goes into this. So again, these two factors are our biggest motivators in helping you make a smart decision about when to apply. Okay. So if you sit through this, and you answered all my self-reflection questions, and you answer yes, I'm going to go ahead this year. you need to be starting to think about your letters, thinking about where you want to store them. We can talk to you about that. There's a couple ways to go about it. But you do want to be having those conversations with your letter writers, and we would really encourage you to attend some additional workshops. There's one coming up on the personal statement and another one every year. We do the application overview. We do that usually early May when we have all the details verified from all the services, because everybody makes little changes every year. If you answered no at any point here, if you had some questions in your mind about whether or not this was really the year for you, or whether it would make more sense to strengthen something before you decide to go ahead and apply. There is an excellent resource from MSU College of Human Medicine. It's called their self-assessment guide. It walks you through each step on this journey of self-assessment. So again, you can Google MSU CHM, that's the College of Human Medicine. So MSU CHM self-assessment. You should get right to that document. And thinking about what is one area of the things that in your head you were kind of like, I'm not too sure about that. Is there one thing that you could focus on improving this semester? If it's exploring a different volunteer organization, if it's really buckling down in a chemistry class and committing 6 out of 7 days a week to preparing for that chemistry class, what is one thing you could do to strengthen yourself at this point? No matter what, please keep reading our newsletter that does come out every other Tuesday and has all the opportunities we're aware of and want to share with our students. Follow us at WSU Pre-Health on Instagram to connect to resources and other opportunities. And be sure to schedule an appointment with your pre-health advisor every semester so we can talk through what's going well, where you want to improve. We can help you find resources to navigate the tough times and help you celebrate all your achievements. Honestly, as an advisor, this time of year definitely is stressful. Working with students who are under a lot of stress. We're real busy, but it is so exciting to get to see each one of you launch to the next step in your journey and help you celebrate those moments of resilience, help you kind of brag on yourself and learn how to do that and talk about all the great stuff you've done. That it is both busy and stressful, but also my favorite time of year. Thanks so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you sometime soon, hopefully in the office or possibly online. And I hope you have a great night. Bye.